Welcome to the Black Knight Nation podcast. I'm your host, Sal Interdonado. The Black Knight Nation podcast is sponsored by Higher Echelon. Higher Echelon is a company that is founded by Joe Ross. Joe Ross is former Army fullback. Joe Ross is a former Army football coach and a former Army officer. Is a company that is former Army officer too, and we thank Joe Ross for supporting the Black Knight Nation podcast. And we have two special guests today. We have Akili King and Will Huff. They're going to talk about their playing days at Army. They're going to talk about an organization called Soldiers to the Sidelines that they're involved with. And I just want to welcome Akili and Will into our podcast. Thanks for joining us, guys.
Thanks Al.
Yeah. First off, we usually start the podcast about the journey to West Point. And for so many, everybody has a different story, right, about how they got to West Point and maybe how it all got started for you guys. Maybe, Will, you could start us off with like your journey to West Point, and then we'll get into like a little bit of football talk, and then we'll get into what you guys are doing now for Soldiers to the Sidelines.
Great. Thanks, Sal. And like many of my, teammates, as well as the Army Football Brotherhood, my path to West Point was getting recruited by a gentleman named Charlie Taff, who was an outstanding coach at Army and then went on to have great success both at the Citadel, the CFL, and several other institutions. But that was the first time I really thought of, academy football, Army football. And I went to the prep school like many of us. And there I had some great coaching that included a gentleman named Pete Edmonds, who I maintain contact with to this day. And that's, I think, one of the themes throughout the Army Football Brotherhood. And then I was very fortunate to play for Coach Jim Young and really a great cast of coaches, as well as teammates, both from upperclassmen all the way down through those, underclassmen as I continued to progress. So my time at Army football from 1986 to 1989 is just filled with great memories of my teammates, of our experiences. We had some success. We had one really good season, 1988, and then I played on some average teams. But even those average teams are just lifelong memories of the brotherhood, fighting through adversity, and lessons that I try to apply not only to my Army career, but also continue on, just life lessons. And I'm very grateful for that Army Football Brotherhood.
I think we timed this podcast perfectly, Will, because your senior year, you guys, I believe, played Wake Forest and beat Wake Forest. And this week, that's Army's opponent on Saturday at Mikey Stadium, a ranked team coming to Mikey Stadium. We can talk about those memories in a second, but let's bring in Akili. And Akili, how did Army discover you?
It's actually a pretty funny story. I actually wanted to go to the Naval Academy first. After taking a trip to Annapolis when I was like in the 7th grade. But that didn't really work out. And at first, West Point turned me down when I initially put my application in. But luckily, there was a class of 66 grad in Mississippi. That's where I'm originally from. And he made some calls, and then West Point started to recruit me. Like I was getting recruited by a bunch of SEC teams, but I really wanted to go to West Point. So I got accepted to go to the prep school. And then got to prep school. One of my coaches at prep school was actually Anthony Noto, which is pretty cool, who went on to work at Goldman Sachs and NFL, and now like the CEO of SoFi, I believe. So that was an interesting time. But I will tell you the best thing about playing football at West Point, and I've had an interesting athletic career because I eventually went to Oregon State. I played football there, and I went and tried out with the Niners. But the best group of men that I've ever played the sport with were all the guys that I played football with at West Point. Right?
Just to have that background when you were at West Point, right? And then when you went on to Oregon State, you probably took a lot of what you learned at West Point and brought it to Oregon State, I imagine, right? And the culture from West Point kind of lives on, it seems like, with former players and to now. I mean, you get there's no gap there, right, Will? I mean, your son was a recent football player at Army, and it's just like there's a bond from guys who played in the glory days of, you know, when Army was chasing national championships to guys who play currently. And it's just incredible when everybody gets together and the stories that can be shared.
That's exactly right, Sal. And I would just share a quick story because it relates to how Akili and I connected. Of course, I had followed Akili's great success in Army football, and Akili and Joe Ross were also teammates. And I was very fortunate that in 1994, I was a young Ranger lieutenant, but I was brought back to accompany the regimental commander as he spoke to the team before Army Navy game. And that was for the 94 season that I believe that was Joe Ross and, his senior year. And it was just a great group of men that really embodied what Army football is all about. And the records don't matter. And I think that is a continuation. And then years later, you mentioned my son. When my son was playing Army football during this great revival, thanks to Coach Mumpkin and what he's done to turn around the team, they were sitting around the training room with Tim Kelly, who has been part of Army football since 1987. And one of the contemporary players asked Tim Kelly, "Who's the best Army football player since you've been here?" And he said, "Yeah, there are guys that have won some great awards, right? From Mike Mayweather to Rodriguez to others. But he said the guy who could play almost any position on the field and would be like a classic 1930s football player is Akili King." So my son called me and said, "Hey, Dad, do you know Akili King?" I only said, "Well, I only know of him. I don't know him yet." And it was great serendipitous that one of our mutual teammates from Akili and I, one of these bridge guys, between my last year in '89 and Akili's first year in '91 or '92, Chuck Gibbs, I was able to connect with Akili. And then now Akili and I work together for Soldiers of the Sidelines. So to me, that's just a great example of the brotherhood. It's remaining aware of the folks that followed you or that preceded you and that follow you. We're all from the same cloth.
Akili, when you first connect with Will Huff, what are your first impressions? And I guess like we talked about, the link of Army football kind of bonds you at first, right? But then there's so much more to that.
Well, I think it was an easy link up because when I got out of the Army in 2014, Chuck Gibbs had asked me before I got out, would I come help him coach football in Arizona at the time? And so Chuck and I spent 2.5, almost 3 years coaching a high school football team together. And he's probably one of the best coaches that I've ever worked with. So when he goes, "Hey, AK, I want you to talk to Will Huff about Soldiers of Sidelines," I was like, "Yeah, not a problem." Right. Because that's the level of trust there that has gone past our playing years. Time, like I hadn't talked to Chuck. Like the last time I saw Chuck was like in 1993, right after because he was my GA at West Point. And you move almost 20 years down the road, I'm coaching football with him. And when he makes a referral, so to speak, you just listen, right? And the other cool part is Will and I have worked in some of the same organizations, like in active duty military, which is another bond. Like we both were in Ranger Regiment. So that was a very, very easy ask when I connected with Will.
Gotcha. Maybe we could talk a little bit about your guys' football memories at West Point. Will, you talked about the Sun Bowl team, and I'm just thinking, the last game of that season against Alabama. That's a game that is I still hear about that game, and I still hear about. I believe Derek Thomas was on the opposite end, right, for Alabama. And growing up, I was kind of a Cardinals/Chiefs fan at the time. And Derek Thomas was, when he came into the NFL, man, he was one of my favorite players. But just to read about and see highlights of what you got that game that could have gone either way. I mean, I don't want to. What are some of your favorite memories as a football player?
Well, thanks, Sal. And I think there are many aspects of that Sun Bowl experience that I could share, and I'll just really focus on three. Number one is that Roger Staubach was the guest speaker for the luncheon, and Staubach was scheduled long before anyone knew in the Sun Bowl who was going to play, whether it was Army versus Alabama or some other teams. And Roger Staubach that day did an amazing job of really capturing the Academy Football Brotherhood. And he said it very well. When Roger said, "There's nobody more that I want to beat than Army, but it's a brotherly rivalry. And there's nobody who I root for against Army." And to the surprise of many of those Alabama fans, Roger Staubach stated publicly that he was, Army's his number 2 team. And there's a relationship that he has with Raleigh Stitchway that goes back all the way to the early 1960s, which is amazing. It's amazing, this bond. And that's something that we have continued to cultivate in Soldier the Sidelines with our Commander-in-Chief Trophy Series, where we bring together veterans that have played in this great rivalry, get them together. In fact, we just had Vince McBeth and Terry Mackey. Vince was the captain of the 1986 Navy team, and Terry was the captain of the 1987 Air Force team. And they had never met each other. They had only played against each other. So there's a bond that certainly exceeds. So that's number one, the impact of Staubach. Number two was a guy like Derek Thomas, who blocked, a field goal and an extra point that ultimately prevented us from winning the game. But interesting that folks may not know is Derek Thomas' father was a pilot, an Air Force pilot in Vietnam that was lost in service. He was lost. He was killed in combat. And when Derek Thomas recorded those NFL record-setting 6 sacks, there was a ceremony where they flew the missing wing formation prior to that game against the Seahawks in honor of Derek Thomas's father. So Derek Thomas was a first-class individual and, tragically taken away. And then I guess lastly, it kind of shows, the linkage of service and football. One of the guys who I played against personally was a guy named Chris Robinette, whose dad was a Army pilot stationed at Fort Rucker. And, Robinette and I still stay in contact to this day. And, he was very influenced as an Army brat and very proud to play Alabama football. But that's just part of the uniqueness. So those are the 3 things I just want to share: the Staubach legacy, a little insight of Derek Thomas, and then just this bond that we felt with many of the Alabama football players. Although we wanted to beat them, there was this real, true mutual respect.
Akili, what are some of your memories, favorite memories as an Army football player?
I will tell you, starting out at West Point and then going to like Oregon State, it was Pac-10 then. Here's what I really took with me. 3 to 4 yards of play and yards after contact. And we had to hit on Tuesday and Wednesday if you wanted to play on Saturday, right? Like that was hard-nosed football that you just didn't get anywhere else. I remember we were playing Boston College, and I probably had one of the best O-lines ever, especially with 3 to 4 yards of play, you're going to get a first down eventually. But watching the O-line block the D linemen and linebackers at Boston College, I've never heard a defense whine so much in my life. Like they were just like, "You can't play that way." I'm like, "Well, it's Army football, buddy." It was just really hard-nosed old school football that when I got out to the Pac-10, I was like, "Well, they're fast, but they're not really mean or tough, right?" It was just a totally different style of football, and it really like influenced how I ran and how I played. More importantly, how I practiced, right? And that's something that like I've taken with me throughout my life. Like if you practice the right way, when it comes time to perform, you don't have to think about it. You just execute. And that's probably one of the that's what I remember the most, really, was, again, 3 to 4 yards of play, yards after contact, and you better practice on Tuesday and Wednesday. So, yeah, that's about it.
Yeah, and coaches even today it still lives on, right? Coaches today are still complaining about the way Army, the cut blocking of Army or the blocking of the offensive line. Miami of Ohio's Chuck Martin came out and had like a 15-minute like dissertation on cut blocking before the Army game, trying to get, I guess, the officials maybe to call a couple. Yeah, so it still is on. So real quick, if you guys could talk about your service in the Army after West Point and how lessons you learned on the football field maybe moved on to your military service and active duty as officer.
Sal, thanks, and I will kick that off. There were a couple lessons that I learned during my time from my teammates and from various individuals, to include a fellow named Tex Turner, who back in the late '80s headed up the Department of Military Instruction. And I'll never forget, we were having a tough time in 1987, and Tex came in to speak to the team, and he just talked about, now, here was a guy who played as a plebe, played JV as a sophomore, never suited up for a varsity football game, and then was cut before his junior year. But he talked about the impact of Army football, even those 2 years that he had. And he said it was a way of life and a state of mind. And I thought that was a great leadership lesson, that when we were 2-4, who was there? Tex Turner. The following year when we were 8-1, Tex was in this, he was in the background. And that's a great lesson for leadership, that when things get tough is when you need to be present. And when things are going well, you let other people take the credit. But I always, learned that lesson from Tex Turner. And then just lastly, some of the things that Coach Young used to talk to us. And number one was about present moment. You got to focus on the present moment. And that's very relevant for, the battlefield. Everything's going to ebb and flow, but focus on the present moment. Don't obsess over past failures or even successes. Be in the moment, present moment. Number two is individual accountability. Everybody has a job to do, and that was something Coach Young really emphasized for us. We understood our role. So whether you were the scout team player, you were a special teams player, you were a backup player, or you were a starter, you were the Ben Barnett who's going to get 15 carries, and Mike Mayweather, like, you knew your role. So that was very important, individual accountability. And then lastly was team always. You were going to be asked to do things. We had guys that were asked to change positions, to do something that benefited the team. And those three lessons I really took into the Army: present moment, individual accountability, and team always. Thanks, Al.
Akili, what did you kind of take from your West Point days into your professional life after West Point?
I would really, to kind of like follow up what Will said, is the way of life and state of mind, right? So, after trying out with the Niners, I actually ended up enlisting in the Army, right, with the Ranger contract. And at the time, I think most of my classmates were captains in the Army, and I came back in as a private first class. And I showed up at Ranger Regiment as a 35-year-old Spec 4, right? Like, I was older than my platoon sergeant, right? But the way of life and state of mind gave me, like, really, I had to learn what it meant to be a Ranger in Ranger Regiment, and having the humility to learn from a 19-year-old kid at 20. Like, my first team leader was 19 years old. Right? Like, yeah, this 19-year-old kid, but you know what? Like, he'd been in Ranger Regiment for 7 months longer than I had. So you know what? I listened, I learned, I became a great machine gunner, and be able to do your job when you have to do it, because it's the football field is one thing, but deploying with the regiment is a whole different. And having that mindset in terms of, and again, the big thing that we did a lot of was practice at regiment, right? If there was downtime, you're practicing, you're training, right? Because you don't have time to think, right, when you're deployed. So that probably was the biggest takeaway. Again, the way of life and state of mind of being an Army football player really translated well in the Ranger Regiment.
We just had a recent podcast remembering the life of General Ray Odierno, and I was wondering if Will, do you have any memories or thoughts on General Odierno that you could share with us? I know that just it was an emotional podcast that we had last week, and just remembering just the incredible person he was.
Yeah, absolutely. I was very fortunate that during times in Iraq, I was able to get time with General Odierno, and I was in a unique assignment at the time with the Asymmetric Warfare Group. And General Odierno was an amazing individual. He always remained incredibly humble, and that he would listen to subordinates. He wanted to hear from the soldiers, the sergeants, the company grade officers. He never lost sight of listening to people, and I always was always common, but I thought that that was a great attribute. And then I always appreciated, one of his key deputies at the time was JT Thompson, who, back in the early, even before me, JT was part of the resurrection of Army football. So you had this great, lineage. You had General Odierno. You also had General Rodriguez, who was a Army football player. You had guys like JT Thompson. So, the lineage of Army football continues on to this day, and I think today's active duty service members in that Army football brotherhood continues to live up to the George Marshall mantra of requiring Army football players to play a critical role, and that's going to include this coming weekend against Wake Forest, where the current CG of the 82nd Airborne, Chris Thani, who is also a former Army football player, and I know that has always shaped his career, and he has the opportunity to come up to the game against Wake Forest this weekend.
Yeah, that's going to be something else on Saturday. We'll be up there. We'll have the coverage, and man, it probably bring back a lot of memories for you guys. Last week against Wisconsin, right, was a big game for Army. This week against Wake Forest is a big game. And when like Akili, when you were talking about the game against Boston College, right, where they're like, cursing out how the blocking and stuff like that. It's just, that shows. I think what Wisconsin showed last week is that Army can basically play with anybody, right, physically, right. I mean, because everybody thought the offensive line was going to not. Both of the lines of Wisconsin was going to knock Army off the ball and just dominate the game. Well, the defense really held their own against that Wisconsin offensive line. And the offense kind of figured it out in the fourth quarter. They kind of got it all together in the fourth quarter. Maybe it was a little too late as far as that happened. But, I mean, to play – and that had to be the mantra, too, when you guys played, right? Play to the last snap of the game, right? The game is never over. Play to the last snap. And that's what Army did last week. I don't know if that was kind of Akili during your day, too, if that was something that was really stressed.
Oh, it most definitely was. But, like, it didn't – the kids today are bigger than the kids when we were playing. I've seen those kids, and they're a little bit bigger than the guys when we were playing. But that mindset, right, of you play until the whistle blows, right? And I guarantee you those guys from Wisconsin will remember that game against Army, right? They're going to remember, right? Because they're probably pretty sore all week, right? Just because of how hard our guys played.
Yeah, there was no backing down in that game, no doubt. We'll see what happens on Saturday against Wake Forest. But, Will, maybe we can get a little bit of soldiers to the sidelines now and what what your mission is, what you guys are trying to accomplish. I know you have something pretty important coming up when Army and Air Force play down in Arlington, Texas in a few weeks, actually. That game's coming pretty fast. Talk to us a little bit about what Soldiers to the Sidelines is all about.
Great. Thanks for asking, Sal. Soldiers to the Sidelines, we're a nonprofit organization that supports veterans, service members, and military spouses into athletic coaching and the sport coaching to serve their community. We have 4 sport line of efforts that include football, basketball, lacrosse, and sport performance. And over the last 15 months, we've grown exponentially. And now we have over 550 soldier coaches through 42 states, including 6 service members stationed abroad. We're really excited about our momentum going into the future. And one of the things that we do is this ongoing remote learning. COVID was a blessing for Soldiers to the Sideline because it forced us to go to a virtual model. And now we're able to reach out And that's how we have this vast number of soldier coaches, not only throughout the continental U.S., but also those stationed abroad. And we're going to continue that on. The New York Jets is one of our great supporters, and we're having both a virtual seminar coming up in November, the week of Veterans Weekend, as well as being hosted by the New York Jets as part of the USO Salute the Service, where the NFL during the Veterans Week, all the teams and the entire league is working with the USO. Does a salute the service, and we're very honored and humbled to be sponsored and hosted by the New York Jets for their game on November 14th versus the Buffalo Bills. So I would just share for the audience that's listening today, Soldiers the Sidelines. Again, we serve veteran service members, military spouses to get into coaching. We have a website, www.soldiersthesidelines.org. We are continuing to grow. We see over the next 12, 24 months to not only solidify the 4 sports that I spoke about, but look at some other opportunities. And it's really only possible because of organizations. You mentioned Higher Echelon with Joe Ross. Like Higher Echelon is also a sponsor of Soldiers of the Sidelines, Wounded Warrior Project, the New York Jets Foundation, Prudential, John Deere. We're just very, very grateful to organizations as well as individuals, because as a nonprofit, we truly depend on that individual philanthropy. And to be candid, the Army Football Brotherhood has been a great supporter of Soldiers of the Sidelines. And this past year, we've also made connections, and we'll continue to grow into the Navy Football Brotherhood and the Air Force Football Brotherhood. Although we want to beat them, just like any brotherly rivalry, at the end of the day, they're no different. Akili talked about he almost went to the Naval Academy. So I think almost every Army football player also considered one of the other 2 academies. So there's not a big difference between our experiences. And we at Soldiers of the Sidelines have the benefit of bringing everybody together. And as you mentioned, prior to the Army Air Force game, we're very fortunate to have both Anthony Noto from Army football and Greg Johnson from Air Force Academy, who I have to admit, Greg beat me my senior year. He was a tailback, and he was an all-WAC running back and still 3rd all-time leading scorer for Air Force. And he's very humble. But the beauty of what we're doing in Soldiers of the Sidelines is we are unified behind this effort. So we're going to have Noto and Johnson on that week before the Air Force game. And then before Army Navy, we're having Troy Lingley, who was my captain of the 88 team, that Sun Bowl team, and a guy named Mark Pimpo from Air Force. So we're really excited about, harnessing all the academy football players and all the other academy athletes and veterans getting behind Soldiers of the Sidelines. So thanks, Sal.
Akili, talk about your role with Soldiers to the Sidelines, National Ambassador Program Director. Talk about what your role is with the organization.
Well, what we've learned, that's a long title, but at the end of the day, what it really means is we do have national level partnerships, which is great. But what we've learned is you have to have a local center of influence, right, in the communities that really connects with those coaches, those school systems, and the parents of the kids that we're coaching. So we're working to build out kind of like an army of soldier ambassadors to be the boots on the ground for Soldiers to the Sidelines.
Well, maybe you could just talk us through a little bit of the process of how you were able to get, you have now, you said 550 coaches that were former military that are now involved in your organization. Is it just a matter of how did you put that kind of group together, so to speak?
That's a great question, Sal. And what we really started with, and as Akili talked about, was identifying the right partnerships. So what we were able to do early on is connect with organizations like the USO, like Wounded Warrior Project. And through those networks, we were able to raise awareness of our program. And our program, starting in 2020, became this virtual model where we do a Monday through Friday, finish up on Saturday, a couple hours each evening. And that validity was really proven by the folks that we've had attend. Some of the talent, I'll just give you a brief example, Sal. During our last football seminar, the initial welcoming was given by Pat Fitzgerald, head coach at Northwestern. We then had a subsequent presentation from Mac Brown at University of North Carolina. The Washington Football Club, Ron Rivera, who, in Ron's case, he was a military brat. In Mac Brown's case, he went on a USO tour 10 years ago, and in his words, it changed his life, and he is incredibly supportive. So we have found that the coaching community really stands behind this effort. There's also this opportunity. So while we talk about these collegiate and professional coaches, our sweet spot is still at that community level. So what's been great is, the majority of these 550 soldier coaches are at the youth community level, and that's where we want to continue. But we also love to have this support from, the Pat Fitzgeralds, Ron Riveras, the Mac Browns. It's been incredible, the Bob Stoops. So that's where we are, and we're going to continue on, and we're really excited about 2022.
Yeah, Akili, you were, coming out of the military, right? You went to coach at football, and you had that experience, and that's gotta help. That experience probably helps you maybe convey the message that you guys are trying to get across a little bit, and trying to get, I'm guessing you're looking to grow and have more, military guys guys or ladies who are getting out of the military to get out to get involved in the community and get involved with kids and be coaches.
I think you're exactly right. When I got out, it's really funny. I showed up it was Scottsdale Christian School in Scottsdale, and it's really funny because I still was kind of like I had a real military mindset at the time, right? And that gave me really like a 6-month period of time to kind of just decompress by pouring into these young athletes, right? And they weren't like the best athletes in the world. I don't think anybody went to college on an athletic scholarship, but being able to give those young athletes a different perspective was it not only empowered me, but empowered them, but it empowered me to kind of like adjust. It helped me adjust to not be the angry ranger when I got out of the Army, right? So so being able to help those kids out, they're not soldiers, and you have to understand that, but the same lessons apply from a leadership standpoint that you can share with these athletes. Something that they can take beyond the sports field was really important. So
absolutely. And on this podcast, we've had a couple of former players, some that are recent grads. Had on Darnell Woolfolk last week, and he was saying that maybe down the road, maybe a strength and conditioning coach for a college football program once he's done with his military service might be. I know Ryan England. I had a conversation with Ryan England, a safety on the recent successful team, saying that, hey, when he's done, maybe that's something that he wants to do. I think that, maybe this is a little bit off subject maybe, but the college football world, you look at Army grads who are coaches, and you can't really, the list is not super long, right? Their guys are out there. Trent Steelman's out there at Eastern Kentucky. Reno Faree's out there at Syracuse. Mike Vitti is the fullbacks coach at West Point. Ben Kotwika had a long NFL career as an assistant coach, but there are not a lot of guys out there. And I don't know if there's anything within your organization that might be able to help them out with the transition. Maybe that's not one at this moment. Maybe that's not one of your organization's focuses, Will. But how do you think can that gap be bridged a little bit, where guys who want to get out once they're done with their military service and want to still get back to the game and feel like they can be successful as whether it be coaches or personnel guys? There's been a bunch of guys that have come back in the personnel department for Army. Ray Maples is one recently. Just wondering what your thoughts on that.
Sal, you really hit off all those, the current West Point Army brotherhood that I'm aware of as well. And in fact, I was at Towson University with Reno, so he's a great illustration. So the answer to your question is yes. Any of those Army grads that are looking to navigate the career, pathway, whether that's at the collegiate level, like a Reno, like a Mike Vitti. I think Reno's a little different because he went to the non-academy path, and that is more challenging. But I think it also provides a unique opportunity where your value added as a veteran is really more unique. We candidly don't have the number of coaches like the Air Force Academy has. Their staff, when you look at Troy Calhoun's staff, there's a significant number of Air Force graduates. And that decision was made, 40 years ago by Ken Hatfield and Fisher DeBerry. So there's a reason why Air Force has a bunch of coaches out there. It's because of their staff. And if you look at the Army staff, besides Mike Vitti, there is no one. So that's a institutional decision made by the respective academies. And I think Navy probably splits between Air Force, which has about 6 graduates, Army that has 1. Navy's probably in the middle with RB Green and a few other guys. But for those West Point graduates out there looking to get into coaching, we certainly will facilitate. But again, our sweet spot is not the collegiate path. Although we have these, networks per se, we really want to help folks that are serving back in their local community, whether that's at Scholastic Youth Middle School. Not to say that we're not going to help out those looking to get into the collegiate path. That may be a little future down the road. So I don't know if my answer was sufficient, but I think if you look at what Air Force Academy's done, that has been a conscious decision that has certainly paid off.
I forgot to mention Tony Coxon. Tony Coxon is coaching at Bluefield, and he's the head coach. And Tony is a guy who coached corners at West Point, and so Tony is a friend of the podcast. I gotta get Tony's name out there. Got to put some respect on Tony's name. He's doing a great job. He's revitalizing a program out there. He's bringing back football to that school, and had him on the podcast earlier in the early stages, and he's just doing a great job building. He's doing what's done at West Point. He's building men of character there, right? And I mean, that's and Akili, you can do that, like you said, when you were in Scottsdale and coaching at the high school level. That's a big part of building character in men, and that can be done at all levels, right?
Yes, Sal, certainly we definitely want to give a shout out to Tony. Tony was one of the first folks to volunteer for his services back to Soldiers the Sidelines, even before he got to Bluefield State. So we are very proud to call Tony Coxon a soldier coach.
Yeah, Akili, I don't know if you can just go into like building the how character plays into this coaching and this Soldiers to the Sidelines and kind of that mission there.
Well, if you looked at it from let's say a 50,000 foot view level, it would be really awesome to have a soldier coach on every sideline or court in the nation to help transfer that knowledge around character and leadership development. Right? It's something that all the services have. Right? When you start talking about the values, every service has a value statement, and that are relevant to what happens on the field or on the court and off the court. And so as we can continue to develop the situation, that's kind of like the North Star, and azimuth for me as the director of ambassadors to put coaches on the sidelines, right, that understand how important character and leadership development is for the next generation of leaders for this country.
Absolutely. You guys are doing a great job. The organization, please follow it. Will, if you can give us the information one more time for people that are listening that want to get more insight on what you guys are doing.
Thanks, Sal. Again, for folks that want to learn more, please visit our website at www.Soldiers the Sidelines, and that's all one word, .org. Take a look at what we have going on. We'd love to get your support. Attend some of our events and start to get a firsthand appreciation. So thanks again, Sal, and just love what you're doing. And both Akili and I are very proud members of the Brotherhood. Thank you.
Yeah, we appreciate you guys coming on today to talk about your past experiences, West Point football players, your time in the military, and Soldiers to the Sidelines. Check their website out for more information. And please check out our website. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. You'll see podcasts like this one with former players. Darnell Woolfolk is a recent one, like I mentioned. Here, Will Huff and Akili King. Lots of great stories. We had a tribute to General Ray Odierno that, man, was a real tearjerker for me. That was if you want to listen to a podcast about a great man and how many people he touched, that's a podcast to listen to. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel and also follow us on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook. We have pages, Black Knight Nation, and even have shirts out there. If you guys want a Black Knight Nation t-shirt, they're on our website. You can purchase some Black Knight Nation t-shirts. Akili and Will, we appreciate your time today. Thanks so much, and look forward to talking to you down the road.